So you just Googled, what's the best lens to shoot portraits, or what's the best portrait lens? What should I buy? And well, a bunch of stupid stuff came up, didn't it? It's okay. You're here now. Stick around. Let's talk about this. What's going on, everyone? My name is Seth Miranda, pro photographer of over 2 decades here in New York. You may have seen me on some other channels like Adorama TV, Manfrotto, Avenger. I think maybe on Nikon shop, bunch of photo brand and lighting brand channels out there. And because of that, I get asked all the time things like, what's your favorite lens for shooting portraits? So I'm doing this series where I just sit down and give you my opinion on some things, try to keep this channel alive. So if you're into photo, video, lighting, anything like that, go ahead and subscribe. You might like this channel, might help you out a little bit. And go ahead and hit up the Discord, share some work. A lot of cool people in there, and everything is free. I am not charging for anything. There's no subscriptions or whatever. Anyway, let's move forward. So what's the best portrait lens, or what's my favorite portrait lens? You see many ways we can ask this question, because there's not really one answer to it either. But what we can ask ourselves to start off is, what is a portrait lens? And I'm sure a bunch of YouTube channels have told you, like, it's this millimeter, it's this focal length, it's this aperture, it's this, it's this, it's this. Well, the reality is a portrait lens is whatever lens you use to shoot a portrait. The real question is, what kind of portrait? Because a portrait is really whatever we do as creators to create a frame that portrays our subject, that person, gives people a sense of who they are, get to know them from an image without hearing a word out of their mouths, or get a sense of what type of person they are. It's our job to use all these tools we have to create that frame, to create that portrait. And one of those tools just happens to be the lens choice, right? Now, I think one of the biggest misconceptions here is that focal length is this for that, and this focal length is for this, and that focal length is for that. And that's not really what it is. If you ask anyone right now what a portrait lens is, they'll probably tell you something that's fairly long. Oh, 85, oh, 105, something that's shallow, 1.2, 1.4, 1.8, 2.8. They'll always have these staple lenses that they kind of go to. And yeah, we'll always take that lens out of our bag that we've had a good experience with in shooting portraits in the past, or have heard good things about. But then how do we really make the portrait our own? Well, that's up to you, and you have to kind of discover the way you create portraits. And the way you do that, your style, no one can tell you how to do that. No one can take that away from you. But if you have a vision or something you're trying to do, we can find techniques and, ways to do things, methods, processes to get you to that point. And that's where we run into things, right? So when it comes to portrait lenses, I kind of shoot all over the place. In fact, you've probably seen me shoot every focal length you can imagine to photograph a human being in this world on one of those channels. And one of the reasons that is because a lot of the times we shoot a new release product like a camera, they want to put out a lens with it, and that they're like, that's the lens you're using. You get a choice. So then you have to kind of finagle it. And one of the ways we finagle it is by our perspective, where we stand, our distance to subject. I swear I'm going to get to some answers here. Just stick with me on this, because maybe some of these tidbits will help enlighten you before you start wasting money on really expensive glass that you might not even use after you shoot it a couple of times. So one of the things I want to talk about is perspective here, right? What does that even mean? Well, when we're looking at the world, we're looking at what people consider 50 millimeter, right? Like that's kind of like the focal length of our eye, so to speak. I hate saying it like that, but that's kind of what we go by, the nifty 50, right? That 50 millimeter, that's not warped, that's not telephoto. It kind of matches the way we see the world, and that gives us a little bit more of a honest, no gimmick type look to our images, and they're more believable that way. And there's always a case for 50 millimeter, no doubt. Well, we can't change the focal length of our eye, really. What we're doing when we change lenses is changing the focal length while we're not really changing our perspective point, our vantage point, where we stand. David Bergman has an amazing video on this. I'm going to link down below because it is exactly what I'm talking about, and you guys should all realize this. And what he's basically going to tell you is you can shoot a 14 millimeter lens at a certain frame, crop it in at a step all the way back, crop it in so that it matches the frame of something that's like a 50, and it'll look the same. Yes, you lose resolution. That's not the point. The point is that the glass can still look relatively the same depending on where you're standing. It's not really about that focal length doing something. It's about where you are while using that focal length. So what am I getting at here? Well, There's a lot of times I want to shoot something and I want it to look more shallow. I will step in. In fact, this is a 35 millimeter, was 1.8. If I step closer, it just got a whole lot more shallow. In fact, you probably saw all those LEDs behind me grow in size. I changed the look of the shot and distorted my face just by getting closer to that lens. And that's one of our tools that we can use when we're shooting portraits. So what kind of lens? I mean, this video is about what kind of lens, right? So let's talk about what our lens choices are. Seth, you're going to be throwing in a bunch of B-roll here. So future Seth, get ready to edit here. You have seen me shoot wide angle for portraits all the time. But what you will probably hear on YouTube is you need longer focal lengths. Why? The idea behind traditional concept of what a portrait is that we use the longer glass to isolate our subject. We make them farther away from our viewpoint, yet we're still close enough in the look of the image that we're right next to them to see what they look like, the details on the facial features, their skin textures, things like that, right? Unless you Photoshop to death, which if you do, you're on the wrong channel. I don't like to edit. Anyway, there's also things about having a shallow depth of field to eliminate distractions like the background. Or maybe there is something about having softer edges and sharper towards the center so that the focus of the viewer of the image goes to our subject. So it's more like about main staging our subject, the person we're shooting a portrait of, not just portraying them, right? And that's fine. You will definitely get usable images, and I'm sure most civilian people out there that just want to hire you to get a LinkedIn portrait are totally down for that. But when I got to do portraits, it's editorial, it's commercial, it's something that I need to tell a story with or something. And a lot of the times what I look around for is not just the person themselves, but their mannerisms. Are they bigger than life? Are they quiet like a mouse? Do they wear a lot of jewelry, or are they like me where they don't wear much and they just keep it simple with like a white t-shirt and jeans? Is there something about where I'm shooting them? So here in this shot, you're looking at L'Amour Supreme, who's a friend of mine and a well-known artist, super talented guy. And he called me in years ago to shoot a portrait of him for a spread in a magazine that was doing like an overview of him and what he does, right? I think it was for Milk Studios back then. Anyway, he told me to come by his workshop, his studio. And how am I going to shoot a portrait of L'Amour Supreme without showing the environment he's created for himself, the environment that he works in, he draws inspiration from, the things he's created have come out of his skull and into that world. And not to mention, look at him. He has so much style to him. His jewelry is just as important as that expression on his face to me. He chose that jewelry. He's saying something to the world. He's putting out a presence and an image for himself. So here I'm shooting with a 24 millimeter lens, and you're seeing top to bottom, shoes to hat and the environment. And I did a lot of lighting tricks here. I go into it in the video. I'll put a link to the video down below because there's always a video on some of these shots, right? But this was a really cool one. And I just said, man, it's a beautiful day out. I want those windows. I really wanted that blue atmosphere because he has this nice, beautiful, warm tone to his skin. Yeah, that's right, L'Amour, I called you beautiful. And he has so many colors in his work, but I really wanted to make it punchy and saturated, but I also wanted you to get a sense of who he was, and the frame to me was the entire environment. And that's kind of where I lean in on the wide angles, and maybe that comes from my pedigree of shooting for BMX and skateboarding, where the environment mattered just as much as the trick those pros were pulling off. What they were doing, that jump or grind or whatever too, was just as important, because a ledge isn't as impressive as getting on top of a wall, right? So maybe that's where I come from with that, and I'm not so traditional with where I was brought up as far as, you know, honing my eye, so to speak. And you are going to hone your eye your way and find the images that speak to you, and you're going to create the images that you feel are speaking the language you're trying to put out there as a creator. So in that instance, a wide angle lens was a portrait lens. And in fact, if you're someone that has to shoot corporate portraits, what's the difference between shooting the guy who is a receptionist with a double chin, glasses, white shirt and tie, or the CEO who might have glasses, double chin, and a tie, and you shoot them both like this with the same 85 millimeter lens, and there's no differentiation there. It's basically the same frame, just different person standing in there. What if you took that CEO to that boardroom and he's at the head of that table, and you shoot it with a wider angle lens, or you shoot it with a 50 millimeter or a 35 or something like that? What if you gave a little bit more presence to his position, their position, because it could be a woman, you know? I think that that's a miss for a lot of new photographers out there when they're looking at portrait lenses. The reality is you have to think about the frame you're trying to create and the characteristics of the lens. How many people out there are looking for vintage type lenses that have a soft look to them when forever people chased the sharpest lenses on earth? You know, it's crazy that we don't think about what a lens actually is a character rather than all these YouTube comparisons of this lens versus this lens. No, look at what that lens is giving you. Does it vignette a little bit? Do we like that? Does it add to something? Does it have soft edges? Does it have sharp corner to corner edges? You know, things like that make a difference. In fact, one of the things I'm known for doing, or prone to, if you want to think of it that way, is I shoot portraits using macro lenses. Yeah, and a lot of people do this, and it's definitely a choice, because a macro lens when you're shooting has a very distinctive look, to me at least. One, it always has a shallower depth of field by nature itself, but the way it's shallow is different, where it doesn't just like gradate off, it kind of just stops linear looking. And I really tend to like that a lot. And it gives me this weird cinema feel. And maybe it's because I was watching just grindhouse movies that weren't using expensive gear at the time and they were using what they were using, and that's what I got. But if you look at these shots here that I shot live with Justin, I wanted that cinematic look, and I shot it with a 105 macro lens. And you can close down a little bit and still get a shallower look. So it also gives me the ability to have light control of my environment by darkening things out, by closing down, but also give me a shallower look because it has that macro aesthetic to it. So you see how there's like choices to what the lens is and what it gives you and what you can get out of it to portray that portrait. So a lot of people also tell you that a portrait lens should be a prime because primes are sharper and they can be shallower apertures and all this stuff. And yeah, listen, I have 85 1.2s and 50 1.2s and all sorts of stuff. And I do enjoy those lenses, and I love having the ability to open up when I need to, if I want that low light ability, or I really do want that shallow look. But a lot of the times in commercial work, we close down a lot because we're not trying to play this super shallow game of just having the cornea in focus. Like, we're trying to shoot a picture of someone that's got enough sharpness to it that you can sell it on a newsstand. Yeah, you still sell magazines. Crazy, right? Or they stop on it when they're scrolling through something or whatever it is. You tend to shoot a little more closed down. In fact, a lot of times you're not even thinking about what's out of focus, think about how much is in focus, right? Anyway, where was I? Right, prime lenses. They'll say it's prime. Well, I tend to shoot a lot with zooms because when I shoot, personally when I shoot, and if you've watched me shoot live, been on set with me, or any of the videos I've shot for any of these channels, you'll see that I'm very erratic when I shoot because I like to let my brain unravel and kind of go with a train of thought and just see where I'm going, and I'm feeling things, and you know, you're just figuring it out as you go along. And I don't want to sit there changing lenses, so I will use a zoom lens. And one of my favorite zoom lenses of all time is the 24 to 120 f4. That's not a 2.8. That's not a 1.8, 1.4, 1.2. No, it is a f4 lens, but it does have a nice close focusing, which means I can do this. And if I get closer and things go shallow, you kind of get that look if you need it by stepping closer. So again, it's about my use of the lens. The 24 to 120 is super cool because I can shoot at 24 like I did with L'Amour there, or I can use that whole range of focal length to change the look and even the shape of my subjects. You know, when you shoot at 24 and then you zoom to 120, yeah, your subject gets bigger, but you're also changing the way they're shaped. You're also changing the way that background looks. It helps you use smaller backgrounds when you're using longer lenses. It just presses them against them. Lens compression, which by the way, isn't a thing. I know. In fact, I think in that David Bergman video I'm linking down below, he talks about it. Not going to go into that rabbit hole. If you do want me to go in that rabbit hole, write me a comment down below. I'll think about it, but there's plenty of videos on it. Anyway, so the moral of this story that I'm talking about, the 24 to 120, is start off with a zoom lens and figure out how you like to shoot portraits and how you see people and how you want to portray them. 24 to 105 f4 lenses are a staple lens for all brands. You can find that lens out there for whatever you're shooting. If you're in full frame, if you're in crop sensor, there's other focal length stuff, but we're talking about full frame standards at this point, just to keep it simple. It's always like asterisk everywhere. I can never just do a quick video. Anyway, guys, this video is running long anyway. When you get used to something like this, when you get used to being able to just shoot a portrait with whatever glass you have on your camera and understand that it's you changing your angle and position that changes the look of the image and what you get in frame and or eliminate out of frame or isolate or include, you're going to realize how much more versatile you get, how many more images you get you didn't think you would have gotten, you wouldn't even have thought to have gotten. And that's why a lot of people tell you, if you're in a creative rut, get a lens and just make sure you stick to that lens and force yourself to use just that lens. Well, if you use a 24 to 105 or something with a nice focal length, you'll start realizing what focal lengths you settle into. Well, a lot of the reason that I'm even like this also is a lot of those videos you see where we do new product videos from new cameras or lenses or whatever, you're stuck with what you have to use in that video, right? A lot of times they want to launch a camera. They want to make sure they put this lens with it to make it a kit. Well, I have to use that kit because that's what they're selling to you guys as the product launch. So I have to figure out how to use things. In fact, turns out to be one of my favorite videos was when Fujifilm stopped by and was like, hey, use this 18mm lens. It's a 1.4. And my producer, Fernando, was like, let's go out in the street and do it with low light. And I'm like, well, what am I going to shoot? I'm like, we don't have a lot of time. I don't want to be out all night shooting in the street, hoping to find something. Let's get a subject. So I called in Arena, an amazing model, and we shot. And I had to figure out how to use an 18mm lens, which on a crop body is like a 27mm equivalency. I don't even like doing that, but if you want to, it's a crop, not an equivalency. Oh, it's another thing I got to get into. Not going to do it. 18mm lens, wider angle than you'd think for portraits. Fair? Fair? Okay. So how am I going to shoot Arena with an 18mm lens and not make her look unattractive with a warped out head and crazy stuff? She's a gorgeous woman. Well, I put together this story in my head. I was like, imagine you're talking to this girl forever on a dating app and you finally get to meet up with her. What's that vibe? And I really just remember all those times you met up with a girl and it's the early evening, the sun's just going down, that night is creeping in, people are going home from work while you're just coming out, and the night is so young, there's so much potential. And that's kind of how I shot this. I wanted to use every available light source I could on the street to give that vibe and sense with a color story. But I also used the lens to just watch how close I am to her so that I'm showing the street. I'm showing that time of day. I'm showing the environment. You're getting that vibe. And that's kind of where maybe this isn't a quote unquote portrait because as it was portraying her as much as it was portraying a scene, right? So this is getting a little bit out of the realm of what's my favorite portrait lens, but I will say you're always portraying something in an image, right? It's us kind of being the filter from cropping out the rest of the world to give people this frame to how we deliver this frame from the way it is, the color, all that stuff. That's on us. What's in focus, what's out of focus, all that is our choices. Remember, every choice you make in a frame is like a word in a sentence. You have to make it make sense because your viewer is going to read all those words in that sentence and get what you're trying to tell them. So part of that is the lens choice. And that's kind of what I want to leave you guys with. I hope this didn't run too long. I know I ramble on forever, but there's always just so much more. And instead of looking at these consumer report channels from brand ambassadors telling you this is this lens for this thing, start looking at what you have and what you're trying to do. And if you're not sure where your style lies yet, go with something that's more versatile. Go with, like I said, a 24 to 105 and start looking at the shots that are really calling to you when you're doing these shoots and go, I keep settling in around 30 to 40 millimeters. It's kind of crazy. And it's kind of nuts how just a few millimeters can change everything. These two shots right here are just 10 millimeters apart. But because I'm standing so close to her, this is Ashley, by the way, that 10 millimeters is so exaggerated. And you might find that in your work as well. And then you'll really get a sense of what your distance is like, how much you should lean in, how far you should step back, and really change the look of those images. So start making decisions. Do you like your subject super isolated with nothing else in the store and you really want to be like, this is what you're looking at? Or do you want to include things? Do you want to build an environment and give more clues to your viewer? Do we want to go super wide angle and really warp out our subjects to show how dynamic and give a certain energy and how crazy it is? Do you want to make sure that they're looking at just this one thing? Like, there's so many things you have to think about when you are creating an image, but sometimes it's after the fact. So start looking at the images that you are proud of that you shoot and think to yourself, what are the properties of this image that really speak to me and I find successful and move forward? So when you ask me, what's my favorite portrait lens or what's the best portrait lens? It's the one you're going to go use to shoot that next portrait the way you like to shoot portraits. Ooh, that felt a little long, but you know how it is. I do this with no script, top of my head, and I just go for it. And that's also how I shoot also. So I guess it all makes sense after a while. But listen, if this was helpful to you, please hit subscribe and the bell so you get notified when I put out more videos. Hit like, really helps out this channel. It's free, it's easy. Check out my work on Instagram. Yell at me on Twitter or X, or I'm calling it Twitter. Join the Discord, share some work in there. A lot of helpful people, and everything is free. I got nothing to sell you guys. I'm just trying to grow this channel channel, and I appreciate your help. So hit me with some comments, likes, all the stuff. And just remember, there's no right answer to any of this. You have to find out what type of creator and photographer or whatever you're trying to be, you are. And then we help you with the tools to make that come to life on a technical aspect. All right. Well, I hope I see you guys in the next one. Let me know down below what else you want me to tackle on this opinion series, and I will see you next time. Later.